Hey there, welcome to the James Show, News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. I think I found a new intro, a new little audio intro for our next guest. If he's going to be on, this often, he should probably have his own intro. So for Jerry J-Man Joyner, host of the Weed and Whiskey podcast, tell me what you think about this. Do you approve of this being your new opener? This comes from the Ollie G Show.
We all know that it's called the bionic, the bomb, the puff, the blow, the black, the herb, the sensi, the chronic, the sweet Mary Jane, ganja, spliff, reefer, the bad, the Buddha, the homegrown, the ill, the Maui, the method, pot, lethal, turbo, Thai, shake, skunk, stress, wacky, weed, blaze, the boot, dime bag, Scooby-Doo, Bob, bogey, backyard boogie. But what is the other terms for it?
Welcome, J-Man. How's that work for you?
Well, I like the simple old word weed, but every language in the world has a connotation to cannabis, which I think is pretty interesting.
Have you checked all the languages?
I have not.
Okay. I was about to say, do you have a linguist hobby I need to know about? All right. So one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on today is because one of the questions that came up when the push for legal weed was actually making some progress and being legalized from state to state is that will this lead to an increase in car crashes? That was one of the long time reasons or excuses for weed prohibition. Well, it's a public safety issue. We can't have a bunch of stoners out behind the wheel of a car. So now that we've had a little bit of time to study it, what have we found?
Well, I think what we found, the most important thing is we don't ever want harm to come to other people. So if you're driving a vehicle, avoid any of the D's. Don't drive drowsy, don't drive drugged, don't drive drunk, and don't drive distracted. But certainly more and more people are consuming cannabis in America today. And this Canadian survey shows that the blood test showed about just a slight amount more people had THC in their system than alcohol of the people that they tested at the emergency room that had been in an accident. And as I drilled down into because I did read on this, the 70-page report from the National Drug Driving Study and the 42-page report from the Ontario Drug Driving Study, it was interesting to find out that 54% was the number that they used at first. So there's 38% of people out there that are on either an illegal or legal drug other than cannabis or alcohol. So all this led me to believe in, James, is, you know what? People use common sense. Don't be out there impaired on anything when you're driving.
Okay, so what's the worst case scenario? Like if you were to take this study in bad faith and try and twist it as bad as you can, what's the worst look you can get out of this study? That
25% of car accidents are actually phone distractions that are causing these. And then we find out that people might have had a little booze in them. They might have had a little bit of weed in them. But again, issue I think is important to look at is how long these things stay in your system. In other words, I could have legally smoked a joint in Nevada. I went to Las Vegas, smoked a joint. 2 weeks later, I'm in a car accident, and it shows I have THC in my system. So now I'm going to be listed as THC impaired, although there was nothing that was going to affect me personally. I'm 50 years I've been using cannabis on a daily basis, and I don't do it anymore, but I've driven and smoked joints in the car. But a couple years back, a friend of mine that played for the Rangers here, Keone Kella, he came by and he brought me some Major League Baseball weed. I smoked a little bit of it. I told my wife, hey, you need to drive us home. I don't think I should drive on this. So people have to be able to police themselves some, but they won't. People, millions and millions of Americans do something in their car that's dangerous to other people. And I think that, that's a huge issue. And we're going to continue to see these numbers rise in all these areas until we can get the self-driving cars taking everybody around in Uber and Lyft, as long as those guys aren't drinking and smoking.
Right. And as partly as I asked the question, that was sort of the answer I was looking for, because one of the shortcomings in so many of these studies is even if you do establish a correlation, that's not the same as a causation. They had it in their system. Does that mean it caused the crash or even contributed to it, or was it a non-factor and just a happenstance? And I haven't really seen any study breach that, but I don't know how they would.
Well, they gather lots and lots of data here, and then depending on how they want their story to sway, there's differences in the University of British Columbia's 2024 drug driving study, different in the Ontario one, which was the 42-page, versus the 70-page that was all across Canada. So, it's hard for us to surmise anything from any of these studies other than we've got issues in America. People, they drive and they're texting, they're smoking, they're drinking, and that's dangerous to other people on the road. And I don't think that any of us want that to happen.
Can't we just make Snoop Dogg drive a Honda and follow him around?
There you go. And there's a new thing called polydrug. I've never even heard of that till today.
What's polydrug? Where you have more than one thing?
So you hadn't heard that one either. That's either a combination of a legal drug and an illegal drug, or two legal drugs that interact with each other in a negative way, or two illegal drugs. So they've got this new term of poly. So we now have people that are on prescription medications that they may affect each other. They take one pill for one thing, one pill for another thing, and that could impair their driving. Well,
that means you have a polydrug show. J-Man Joyner from the Weed and Whiskey podcast. It's a polydrug show. Thank you. How do they find you? Just go to wherever they're listening to podcasts, type in Weed and Whiskey?
Yeah, Weed and Whiskey. We're on Roku. Our TV show's on Roku. It's Spotify's our podcast, and we appreciate y'all having us on anytime.
Ooh, I want to see your TV show. Thank you very much. Again, J-Man Joyner. All right, if you have any comments on that, 800-288-WBAP. But I want to get back to the political discussion that we were having. Is politics, has it caused any tension at your workplace? Another interesting angle on this is, have you ever broken up with a girl over politics? Or has a girl ever broken up with you over politics? Are you dating or married to someone right now who's your political opposite, and how does that go? Because even, I don't know, you can't just get along, like even at the workplace, even in a relationship, just because you don't have the same economic platform. I think people take this way too serious. 800-288-9227. 800-288-9227. It's the James Show. News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. Hey there, welcome to the James Show. News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3. I'm sorry, I was just amusing myself because I'm doing this remote from the All-Star Village. The Major League Baseball All-Star Game is going to be here in town next week. And so in the days leading up to it, they're having the All-Star Village, Globe Life Field, and Choctaw Field. And I'll be at the Esports Coliseum next to the Arlington Convention Center. But they run these, like I get these emails saying, hey, would you like any of these guests to stop by your table on Radio Row? Because, live broadcast, there's going to be a bunch of stations there. They walk through people who sit down and talk to you for 5-10 minutes, whatever. And it's all baseball people. But wouldn't that be interesting to just sit down with Pudge Rodriguez and be like, hey, bro, who you voting for? Right? What'd you think of the debate? Rafael Palmeiro, what did you think of that? I don't think they would do that. But if they did, that would be great. But come out and see me. I'll be doing the show Monday and Tuesday live from the All-Star Village. All right. In this segment, though, I want to talk to financial strategist Bill Dendy on the show because I have made the prediction, Bill, that there's going to be a federal funds rate, interest rate cut. I just know it's going to happen before the election because I feel like the Fed is a completely political captured entity, and that makes political sense, even though it doesn't make sense financially. I'm cynical, but am I right?
I think you're getting more likely to be right after the CPI numbers came out today. And, they're not supposed to be connected, but it does seem that the incumbent, if we have a rate cut in September, the markets tend to move up quickly. And September, October, November, people are feeling pretty good when they look at their statements. They feel like the world's okay right now. And when they feel like the world's okay, they don't want change. So I think that you may be right, but maybe not for the reasons you think you're going to be right. But whatever, I think you're right.
Well, as long as I'm right at the end of that sentence, I am happy. So the federal funds rate gets cut. What happens? Is there some movement the person listening to us should be doing or something they should be looking for?
Well, for a lot of people, they're already seeing some of the changes happening. We've had a window maybe of opportunity when rates were very high, the highest rates we've seen in 23 years. And the highest they've seen in 23 years because we're trying to fight off this inflation. But for those savers, for those people who are invested in CDs or bonds, we have we had horrible 3% rates, 2% or less, and now they're getting 5.5% in their one-year CDs and other bonds. What a window to lock in that, because generally when the Fed starts in a direction, it's not a one and done. It begins, the tide is starting now to go out, and that tide goes out cut after cut after cut after cut, each meeting for a course of a year or two, which means some of these higher interest rates for investors may not be here in 2 years. And it may be an opportunity with the markets near all-time highs if we've already gotten maybe a little heavy in the equities, and maybe because we're a little older, we should be toning things down, and we're worried about a market collapse or a correction after the elections. It may be a great time to revisit your portfolio allocation and take advantage of the fixed income being at higher interest rates from what we've seen over the past 23 years.
Right. So I guess, like, practically speaking, when you say toning things down, you mean getting out of those risky stocks and getting into something more fixed, like, I don't know, annuity or bonds or CDs or something.
Exactly, that type of thing. And that's the traditional method of investing. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, the traditional things, we might do something different this time. But traditionally, they said we should have a mix between equity and debt securities, equities being the real estate and the stocks and the precious metals and such, and the fixed income being the CDs and the bonds and the fixed annuities and such.
Well, let's talk about the other half of that balance as far as interest rates go. If the federal funds rate gets cut, does that mean some of these mortgage rates can come down?
That's a blessing for those who have variable interest rate debt. So for those who've been carrying variable interest rate debt and they have the variable interest rate mortgages, what they've seen go up and up over the past couple of years, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think when I didn't lock this thing in that it was going to ever get this bad. Well, they're going to start seeing some relief. And once the relief starts, it'll probably continue for a year or two as the Fed continues to cut. So that's a positive. For people who have variable interest rate credit card debt, it's a little slower to respond, but they should start seeing a little bit of relief. Not that we should be carrying that kind of debt if we don't have to, but it's for those who have it, it's going to be a little bit of relief. And then even those in the equity markets, when the Fed starts cutting interest rates, the markets say, hey, party's on. It's expansionary again. And so generally the markets move up. But you saw today kind of mixed markets. And that's because, well, gosh, everybody kind of expects it to happen. And this means that we're going to stop trying to slow down the economy with higher interest rates. But the lower interest rates generally favor the stock market for a short period.
Wow, a lot to think about there, Bill Dendy. So let's say these interest rates get cut. We can still expect inflation to keep roaring, though. They say, well, now that inflation has cooled down to around 3% or though, that's still way above their target. And this whole inflation that was supposed to be transitory, it's starting to look permanent.
Well, consumers, I've heard people say that, things have slowed down, but I'm still paying more at the grocery store. I'm like, yes, we are. We're still paying like 20 and 25% more than we were a few years ago. But the rate of increase has slowed down. And that's all they're saying is the rate of increase has slowed down, and it's still faster increase than ideally they wanted. And that's why this interest rate cut happening in September, while I think you may be right, the odds of it happening have jumped up to, 80 to 90% from 50-50 a few months ago. It still might not happen. And it still may not happen because the Fed is looking at a combination of things, and that combination is that inflation is still higher than they want, and now unemployment has ticked up a little more than they want. And they have this, three-pronged mandate of ensuring fair exchanges in prices and employment, so to keep unemployment real low, and then, finally to balance inflation. And so inflation's not balanced. And now it looks like the unemployment's ticking up. That may be reason enough for the Fed not to cut the rates in September. Well, maybe there's some political influence going on that gets cut anyway. I don't know. I'm joking. That was a joke. That was just a joke.
Well, look, we'd like to beat them up, but there's really only so much they can do about inflation if we're going to be running $2 trillion deficits every year.
And that's another interesting thing. If we don't get the rates down, the federal government is not, when bonds come due, paying them off. We're just borrowing more money to pay the principal off. We keep rolling this thing up.
Laddering up,
financing. Yeah. And if we keep laddering up at the higher interest rates, oh my gosh, it's going to be bad. We need to be laddering up at the low interest rates. But our debt is so large that it's going to be very difficult to sustain a higher interest rate. So there's a lot of good macroeconomic reasons that they would like rates to be lower, but it's difficult to get rates lower when you have that much debt and that market. It's kind of an interesting cycle, and you see economists arguing both sides. You see some economists arguing that we might have a period of hyperinflation, where our way out of debt is we'll just print more money, and we'll just go down on it, and we'll print a ton of money. It hasn't worked well for any economy that's ever done it, but that may be the last resort, and that turns out having really, really high interest rates, and it's a whipsaw. Now, that's the extreme, and I don't think that's going to happen either. But it's interesting that if you start reading around and start listening to economists, you'll every scenario you could imagine, and some of them are really kind of scary.
All right, Bill Dendy, financial strategist. Thanks for taking the time on the James Show. How do they find you outside of WBAP?
God bless you. It's alicorninvestmentmanagement.com. ALICORN.
Thank you very much. Coming up next, more of the James Show, where I'm going to run by you some of this audio I picked up from the Colbert Show. This is supposed to be a comedy monologue, and you tell me if this didn't get pulled straight from the Democrat National Convention. That's coming up next on the James Show. News Talk 820 WBAP, now on FM at 93.3.